Welcome to Over 50 TV. My name is Lou Reyes, and hopefully you can all hear me. I am on a new system today, but it looks good. But anyways, that doesn't matter. What matters is Trump's new tariffs and how they could hit older workers hard. And I'm going to explain all that. I'm going to talk about his announcement yesterday, his sweeping tariffs on all imported goods. And in this live stream, what we're going to do is we're going to break down what it means for older workers and why many economists are fearing a recession. And if we do have a recession, there's no question it could hit over 50 job seekers pretty hard. So let me just bring you up to date on what happened yesterday.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
Let's take a look at what's been happening with the market's reaction to those tariffs that were announced yesterday afternoon after the market closed. Right now, you see the Dow futures are off by about 1,100 points. Let's look at these on a percentage basis, too. The NASDAQ right now down by more than 700 points. The S&P futures are down by about 186. That's a decline for the S&P of 3.25%. The Dow off by close to 2.6%, and the NASDAQ down by 3.6%. These market sell-offs, at least at this moment, in the early hours before we get to the opening bell, are bigger percentage drops than you're seeing around the globe. So there are a lot of concerns about what this will mean for the global economy. But right now, it seems to be hitting hardest right here in the United States.
How much could these tariffs cost Americans?
The annual tariff cost per household, they estimated, get this, Phil, between $1,600 and $2,000. That's about 2% of the median household income. I mean, my God, if you're going paycheck to paycheck, as we talk about 25 to 30% of households do live paycheck to paycheck, that is a huge jump. And where do we see those costs really hitting? Well, I'll give you a few different examples, all right? Computers, up 11% potentially. How about natural gas? Up 5% potentially. How about white rice? Up 4% potentially. And so we just see it throughout different parts of the economy, the American consumer getting hit potentially by these Trump tariffs on top of the inflation we've already seen. It is no wonder why my opening slide said the American consumer is fed up. They have just been hit over and over again over the last 5 years. And truthfully, there's not much of an end in sight.
There's not much of an end in sight. And I've been doing this channel long enough to know that there's a lot of skeptics out there. Anytime I mention anything with Donald Trump or anything negative about Donald Trump, or even just show you what I just showed you here, I get a lot of blowback. Not a lot of blowback, but there's folks out there that don't believe their eyes, and they'll never believe their eyes. But what we're saying, and you have to believe, or you should believe, if you're somebody who is older and you're looking for a full-time job, or maybe you're working at a company and you're thinking to yourself, what's going to happen? Is this recession going to impact me? Well, all you've got to do is look at some of the history, some of the data that we know, things that have happened in the past. For example, during the Great Recession, they talk about the Great Recession as if it was decades and decades ago. In fact, it was 11 or 12 years ago, but it still resonates with a lot of folks out there because there are many folks that lost their jobs. And when you lose your job and when you're older, you are less likely to be rehired. You're more likely to take a pay cut if you even keep your job, but you're also often pushed into retirement. And for many folks out there, if you're retiring early and you're forced to take Social Security because maybe you just have to take it, you need that extra income. Well, if you take it early, well, obviously, I will say it's going to impact the amount of money that you make or you get every single month from the government. We all know this. But the point that I'm trying to make here is we've got these tariffs that are widespread, these tariffs that are without a question, these sweeping tariffs on imported goods. And what I hope to do anyway, as I mentioned, is just break this all down for you so you could really kind of understand exactly how this could affect you. But when you have data, we know that we had the recession, we had COVID, and during COVID, of course, we had a lot of folks laid off, a lot of folks who decided they were going to retire early. And in fact, many of them came back. And then during President Trump's last tariffs, the last time he instituted tariffs, agriculture was hit hard. and also manufacturing. Now, numbers, there's a lot of dispute into how many folks lost their job in the manufacturing industry, but there's no question. There's no question that tariffs affected us in the past. There's no question now that tariffs will affect us going forward. Now, the big question I suppose we have is, will there be a recession? Will we feel a recession? Is that something that we can all look at and say, yeah, it's going to happen? But we don't know at this point. Is it likely? There are folks out there, and I'm going to concur with them, that, yeah, it's likely that we're going to have a recession. How severe? It's hard to say. But when you look at the S&P, on how far it's dropped, and I know a lot of folks out there are tying their retirement to the S&P, whether it's stocks or maybe you have some other types of investments. But yes, the tariffs that were implemented, I'll just say implemented yesterday, they are going to have an impact, and they're going to impact older workers, I think, a lot more than it would a younger worker. And there again, there's plenty of data out there that will say this. I'm going to pull up a panel here that I put together. It's regarding the last recession that we had, well, the Great Recession. It said older workers were less likely to be rehired quickly. That's number one. It was a study done by the Urban Institute. It's what they found to be true. And it says here that unemployed workers in their 50s were about a fifth less likely than those aged 25 to 34 to become re-employed. And that's from some research that was done from the National Bureau of Economic Research. And then you go down to number 2, it says here, older workers are more likely to take pay cuts upon re-employment. And that's unfortunate, but that's the Urban Institute. They did the study. They reported that the median monthly earnings declined 23% upon reemployment for workers aged 50 to 61. That's compared with an 11% decline. More than double older workers declined. And it says 11% decline for workers aged 25 to 34. If you go down to number 3, it says older workers were often pushed into early retirement, even if they weren't ready. There's a study published in the Journal of the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. You can all see that for yourself. And this is data that that we research here. I should say we, because it's more than one person here who's putting together this data. And then if you look at the very bottom, I think this is the thing that really, I don't know if I should say upset me the most, but it certainly had an impact on my thinking. It says the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College found that during the Great Recession, more older workers claimed Social Security benefits early, resulting in reduced monthly benefits. And again, we're talking about how the impact of a negative economy, of an economy that is hurting. You can see what will happen. And what I showed you is from the Great Recession, but it also happened during COVID. And some of it also happened during the last time that President Donald Trump decided he was going to go ahead and put tariffs. I mentioned how agriculture was hurt, manufacturing was hurt. There were other industries, other sectors were hurt, steel not being one of those sectors. But as an older worker, as somebody myself who is an older worker, many of my friends are older workers, and what we've seen time and time again, when a company can take an opportunity or feels like they can just have a reason to push an older worker out of their job, they'll do it. And again, some folks will say, well, Lou, that doesn't happen all the time. I mean, I've got a great job. But yeah, some of us do have great jobs and some of us won't be pushed out. But the data shows, and we've talked about this many times on this channel here, that 56% of older workers are pushed out of their job before they're ready to retire, and they're pushed out because of their age. These are serious, serious issues that many of us are facing here. And it's unfortunate that as an older person, as an older worker, you put all this time in. And then what you see is that we're just cast aside. And we're cast aside for a variety of reasons. Older workers are often targeted because they think, or employers will say, well, they've got a higher salary. I've got to cut higher paid workers. It's my desire to cut costs, so they're going to do that. They also perceive that we have outdated skills. So ageism, of course, plays a role in that. Then some folks will say, well, the healthcare costs, there's higher healthcare costs, and then less time left in the workforce, and Employers may prefer to invest in younger employees because we've got less time left that will be working, so they'll go ahead and they'll just take that younger worker. Now, it's also harder for us as an older worker. It's harder for us to bounce back. Older workers typically, it typically takes us longer to find a new job. We're often forced to accept lower paying or even part-time roles at a company. And those part-time roles often are lower paying. And many of us end up, as I mentioned a couple times in this live stream here, we retire earlier than we planned, and this could seriously impact our long-term financial security. And this is something, again, that many of us have experienced. Now, we can go ahead and dispute the tariffs. We can say, well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. We're going to wait and see what happens. But we know without question that costs will go up. And Donald Trump has admitted that we're going to have some difficult times, some challenging times ahead. Now, had he mentioned this during the election, that we were going to have challenging times, and I don't believe I ever heard that from him, but had he mentioned that, maybe I could have accepted a little bit more. But the point being, with these tariffs, many older workers are going to find themselves without a job or being in a job where they're underpaid. And when you're underpaid, you're not able to take care of, not only pay your buy your groceries, go on trips, go on a vacation or two. You're not able to do those things, but then also your credit gets impacted. And there's plenty of folks out there who will probably say, well, Lou, you know what? Credit's the least of my worries. But truthfully, credit should be one of our big worries, because this recession that's anticipated, without likely recession that's anticipated, it's going to end at some point. Now, I thought it was interesting that the folks there on CNBC were saying, we don't know what's going to happen. Harry Entman over at CNN, same thing. It wasn't, there's no end in sight. Well, there is no end in sight, but there's always a beginning and there's always an end. So taking care of our credit, that's certainly important. Making sure that we've got the skills that we need so that we can be successful, that's also important as well. And when I say skills that we need to be successful, what I'm talking about is sometimes we're going to have to reskill. Sometimes we'll have to go back to school, especially for somebody who's 50 years old, you're in your early 50s, mid 50s, even 60s, and you're saying, I've got to make money. I started this YouTube channel. I've got some other sources of revenue that I can depend on, but I also, myself anyway, what I did is I just said I didn't want to depend on a company. And the lesson here, I suppose, for all of us is to do what we can do, make the money any way we can, but we're going to have to reskill. Now, I want to go back to credit, because I do have somebody that I want to bring on here who I asked to come on today, because when I knew about the tariffs, and we've all known that they were coming, but when we started thinking about it and we were talking about it in a meeting, we said, well, you know what, folks are going to, and there are folks, we just heard some reports a couple days ago, folks are more concerned about today and not tomorrow. So I want to bring on Kish Townsend. Kish is someone who has a YouTube channel called Kish Talks Credit. And what I'm going to ask Kish to do is basically just give us some tips on how we can protect our credit, if it's possible anyway, if we can. But I'm going to ask Kish to give us some tips on how we can protect our credit during a time where we can say, I would just say fairly confidently, that these tariffs, Trump's new tariffs, are going to impact older workers hard, and I think harder than they will affect younger workers. So let me go ahead and pull Kish up here if I can get this over here. Okay. Kish, are you there? Yeah, there you are.
Hi.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kish. I think you might have heard some of what I said anyway. I had you in the green room there. And as I'm very concerned about the tariffs myself. I kind of just gave a rough outline to the viewers here about what they can expect as an older worker. And so I want to talk a little bit about credit and how they can protect themselves, because this recession, we're not in a recession, I should make sure that's clear. But whatever happens in the economy, we know for sure there's going to be a slowdown. There's less investment, capital investment from overseas, which is important. That's not being taken into consideration, I don't think, by a lot of folks. I don't think about it anyway. So what can we do, Kish? What can someone do in order to protect their credit so when this is all over, and it'll be over one day, what can somebody do to protect their credit?
Hey, Lou, thanks for having me on. And it is okay to use the R word
Yeah, I'd like to
because
think so.
because we may be looking at that in the very near future. But we don't have to panic. We really do have more control over our personal finances than maybe we think. Yes, credit will look a little bit different. Credit will more than likely be a little bit harder to get in this economy that we're looking at here going forward. But I don't believe people really should give up on their money management goals.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Kish. The first thing, though, you said is maybe not panic. And I heard that some pundit this morning said, well, don't run down the street screaming, throwing your arms up in the air, saying it's, it's over. We're not saying it's over, but we're saying this has to be addressed seriously. We have to plan now. A lot of folks are going to be cutting back, but we talk about cutting back, what are some of the tips though that you can share? I mean, should we cut back on going on trips? Cut back on going out to dinner? Should we try to pay off our credit cards if it's possible?
I don't think we necessarily have to look at our our budget as making all these drastic cuts to it. We just have to think more strategically. We can do simple things, going back to the basics, like making a grocery list, um, taking advantage of coupons. Many local grocery stores will offer electronic coupons that you can download right on your phone. Maybe instead of um, on a Saturday afternoon, driving to 5 different places, going home, going back out, driving to more places. I know I'm guilty of that. Maybe combining our trips, our errands into one car trip to save on gas. Just simple things that we could do don't necessarily mean that we have to drastically slash our budgets if we just think a little more strategically.
What do you tell somebody who is living paycheck to paycheck? I mean, they mentioned that on the opening here. One of the reporters, I guess he's really a researcher, Harry Entman. He mentioned how he had some concerns about, like, people who live paycheck to paycheck. What are they going to do? I mean, what's the solution there? I mean, I know what you're talking about,
Mhm.
combining trips and watching some of our expenses, but what else can they do? Especially if you're on Social Security or you're somebody who's nearing that age and you got to take it. I mean, you're living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, no doubt. This is a scary time for a lot of Americans who, especially, are relying on Social Security or relying on a job where their income, they look at it paycheck to paycheck.
Hmm.
And even before this has happened, before these tariffs were announced, we've had people living paycheck to paycheck. It's just a matter of, again, just thinking more strategically, maybe looking at a side hustle. I know you talk to
Yeah, yeah.
your a community of folks about different side hustles um, that you could do. Y- We just have to, maybe, I hate to use the word, but maybe think more outside the box. We can't rely necessarily on these jobs. We're seeing it now.
Hmm.
A good job used to be with the federal government. Now the federal government has been drastically reduced these jobs. So we just have to look at other ways to bring in income.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I have that side. I have my other channel, Side Hustle Rules, and I started that channel. I actually started that channel to help folks who start side hustles, learn how to go ahead and start a side hustle. And on that channel, I use a lot of my experience as someone who's owned a number of large and medium-sized businesses. but there's a lot of uncertainty out here right now. And when there's uncertainty, folks are kind of like, just running around trying to figure out what to do. I was listening to Mark Zandi. He's a chief economist for Moody's, and that was one of the things that he was stressing is we just don't know, from one day to the next. I mean, Trump, what he did on March 4th, he put a tariffs against Mexico and Canada on March 6th. 2 days later, just 2 days later, he took the tariffs off. He gave them a reprieve of 30 days. And I think folks are thinking now, well, Trump's going to go ahead and give another reprieve. And, possibly that could be, and then we won't have to, or a lot of folks won't have to worry as much. But there's still, from what you're saying, they should still follow. I think what you're saying anyway, they should still go ahead and follow some of the tips that you're giving us.
Yes. And one thing I will say, Lou, just to kind of back up a bit,
Hmm.
in my community of folks and in my circle, we are really looking at how each other is doing.
Huh.
I know we want to watch the news, we want to, get on social media and see what's going on, but to get in the right headspace to move forward and to be financially healthy, over in our community, we say we want to make financial health normalized again.
Hmm.
Um, we want to look at the whole person. We don't want to spend so much time looking at these news stories about the tariffs and things like that. We
Hmm.
really want to um, look at the whole person. How is this affecting our mental health?
Yeah.
I was just reading this morning about the divorce rate in the United States. It's up to over 40%. And um, key indicator of divorce is financial issues.
Yeah.
And if we're able to really look at our family, our relationships, how we are doing mentally, that's really going to help us as we get into these potentially stressful financial times.
Well, I think you said something, Kish, that I think is very helpful. I mean, it's a number of things, but the one thing you said was look at the whole person. Don't get so stressed out about the news. It's hard, I suppose, when you're still, a person out there who's trying to keep your job and you're hoping you don't lose it. But I agree with you. I mean, I know folks. My wife would also say and will agree with you that she doesn't want to watch the news. She's tired of seeing what's going on. She's not putting her head in the sand, but it's at a point where it's like, it's affecting your whole health and your whole being. But
Right.
I appreciate your coming on. I'm going to ask you one last thing though. Is there any like one thing that you think somebody, especially an older worker, can do? Maybe you're worried about your job. Of course, your one thing you're saying is don't look at the news. Don't let that affect your health. Is there anything else you can suggest?
You want to look at your network.
Hmm.
If you're looking at maybe potentially not having your job because of what's happening, if you're seeing some indicators of a possible job loss, you really want to look at your network and even cast out your net a little bit further than your normal network by
Hmm.
seeing who knows what, who do you know in an industry that you may like to enter in. Maybe you are in the trades currently, but you always thought about getting into sales.
Hmm.
Maybe look at who you know in your contacts on your phone who's in sales and just cast a wider net and keep those relationships because you may need them.
Yeah, and that's just about the best advice I think I've heard in a while. But yeah, you're right. You never know when you're going to need them. Well, Kish, thanks for joining us. I definitely appreciate it, and I'd like to have you back again when you're
Great.
available.
Always available for a fellow YouTuber.
All
Love your
right.
channel.
All right. Well, yeah, and your channel is Kish Talks Credit.
Yes.
All right, cool. I'm sure we'll get some people to go over to your channel as well. Thanks, Kish.
Thanks.
Well, folks, you just heard the words from Kish Townsend. I've known Kish for a long time. She's been involved in many businesses. I should say she's been involved in some very successful businesses, and I'm really glad to have her on to offer her advice, especially regarding credit, which she is an expert when it comes to credit and managing credit. But again, I just wanted to take today to talk about Trump's new tariffs and how they could affect older workers. The takeaway on this program here, on this video anyway, is to not necessarily run down the street screaming, but just batten down the hatches for a while. Watch your expenses, pay attention to how much money you're spending, and if you are someone who is worried about your job, as Kish said, look for a side hustle or some other source of income, but go ahead and lean on the folks around you that could potentially help you, and probably if your friends are like mine, they'll help you. They'll find a way, even if it's just giving you some great advice. All right, that's all I got for you today. I'm going to go ahead and see how I can sign out of this. But other than that, as I always say, have a great day, everybody.